which I think really illustrates how important the stakeholder input today is. So I am Laura Yates. I'm a geneticist and a teratologist, and I'm going to just spend a little bit of time looking at why Work Package 2 and the wider conception project is so important. And really, I think the photograph of the little baby on the screen, which was taken not 50 years ago, but in the last decade, illustrates the importance for a continued focus on primary source data, and is the reason that most of us are, if not all of us, are here today. So Work Package 2, as Dave mentioned, is focused around information that's collected specifically for the purpose of assessing safety and risks to the mother and fetus following medication use in pregnancy. And I thought it was useful to just explain that there are a number of terms that are used to describe these data sets. It can be quite confusing. And sometimes we all use the terms slightly differently. But just to clarify that the work that's being undertaken in Work Package 2 does not include secondary analysis of population-based electronic healthcare records. So for instance, GP records or hospital records. This type of data is being looked at, but that is being covered by Work Package 1, and so will not be the focus of the workshop today. So what we wanted to do as a starting point was really just to review the current approaches in place to pregnancy pharmacovigilance. One could be forgiven for thinking that, in fact, everything is under control. If you look at the number of initiatives that were set up following the thalidomide experience over 50 years ago, there really are multiple sources of data. So there are a lot of data sources out there, and these extend from post-marketing safety databases, so databases where reports of abnormal outcomes following pregnancy exposure are sent, as well as other systems that have been set up specifically for monitoring the safety of medication in pregnancy. And again, these range widely, and they include registries held by pharmaceutical companies. They include disease-based registries. And then there are a number of expert systems, such as the European Network of Teratology Information Services and our colleagues in the States, OTIS, now known as Mother to Baby. And of course, regulators too collect data. And although this sounds as if it should really have everything covered, what we have seen is that these data collections are really all quite variable. They're not standardized. They use a number of different coding systems. And as a consequence, it is very difficult sometimes to actually interpret and put to good use the data that are being collected. How do you compare a result generated by one data set with another when the methodology being used is completely different? And what we see now is that this is contributing to a delay in information getting back to health providers and to women. And really, it limits what we're able to do. And we feel that this is not acceptable, and that we really need to be focusing on improving how we collect these data. And that is what the work being done in this work package is really focused on. So today we'll present some of the demonstration studies and work that we are working on to address these problems. But what we really want to do through this workshop is to obtain some of your views on barriers and gaps in the current systems, and to ask you for feedback through Zoom polls on the work that we are proposing, whether you agree that what we're doing would be useful, and to endorse or not endorse what we're doing, or to give suggestions as to how we might be able to do it better. And what we would like to do is to use the group map tool, if possible, to try and identify some of the priority areas. So what is possible on the group map is the option to vote if you see an idea that you like. And I just want to highlight that the output of this meeting will be used to inform the recommendations that we make going forward for pregnancy pharmacovigilance documentation and guidelines. So I just thought I'd put up a much less impressive map than the one Dave showed, just to really illustrate again that this is a global issue, and it's not just something that's limited to difficulties in one part of the world. And we talk a lot about real-world data and real-world evidence. And so I thought I would give a real-world example that sprang to mind when I saw that map. And it is the story of dolutegravir and the women who met in Kigali. So I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with this, but I will just quickly go through it. So in 2018, a pregnancy registry reported a possible link between dolutegravir use in pregnancy and spinal defects in the babies that were born to some of the mums. Dolutegravir is a new treatment that had been developed for HIV. And the registry that was being run was well regarded. It was overseen by very experienced teratologists in the States. And the data that had come out of the registry previously and from other limited sources had not really identified any problems. And this caused quite a stir in the teratology community because it coincided with the planned transition from older, less effective HIV treatments to use of dolutegravir in multiple countries around the world. And as a consequence of the potential significance of this observation, a number of key organizations started the process of reviewing the evidence. And what was immediately apparent was that additional data were needed to either confirm or refute the findings. And whilst this was going on, there were a lot of confusing communications released by different organizations and different responses to the signal, which were very interesting. And one of those responses was the position that the European Medicines Agency took, which was to release a statement that dolutegravir should not be used in women seeking to become pregnant until the review had been completed. And what happened after that is really interesting, and I think it really illustrates beautifully the importance of every single stakeholder group. And as Dave alluded to earlier, the numbers of stakeholders are not necessarily always what is key, but it's just having input from everybody and that those inputs are all equal. So in February 2020, 39 women living with HIV from 18 different countries attended a stakeholder meeting in Kigali, Rwanda, to voice their concerns about the response to this signal. And these women debated the risks, which were uncertain based on the data being weak about spinal defects and possible effects of weight gain and high blood sugar in the mothers, and the benefits, which were strong, were based on stronger data, which showed reduced side effects, improved efficacy, and the likelihood that the drug would be effective and not, that there would not be a high rate of HIV resistance. And these women then wrote a letter in which they called for people living with HIV to be able to make informed choices about their own treatment. And there were some of the stakeholders voiced the opinion that women should not just be denied access to a therapy on the basis of a signal, but instead we should all be working together to look at how we could mitigate the effects by introducing monitoring, for instance, of weight or blood sugar, and that appropriate clinical guidelines and management were needed. But one of the issues, of course, is to do this, one really needs robust data. And so in the absence of there being any other good registries in the world, the opportunity to look at adverse event report data was considered. And a publication in 2020 was quite revealing, in fact, and it showed that although we have large databases of adverse event reports, so those are reports that are submitted with abnormal outcomes following a pregnancy exposure, these data sets were very hard to interpret because there was no indication of the number of women who'd taken the drug and had a normal outcome, which is the model on which pregnancy registries, as many of you know, are based. And so what became clear is that these pharmacovigilance databases were not sufficient to use for pregnancy safety studies for a number of reasons. And the recommendation was really that ongoing active collection of data are required. And a subsequent report, also looking at HIV drug safety studies in an adverse event database in 2022, confirmed these, this opinion and these findings, and really again highlight the need for us to improve how we design safety studies. And I think this is highly relevant because more recently there has been a move to look at adverse event reports in this context, and you will see from the NCEP standards, methodological guidance standards, that spontaneous reports in general of adverse drug effects are regarded as the cornerstone of pharmacovigilance. But I think what we can see is that this is not the case for pregnancy, certainly not yet. And on that note, I would like to hand over to Shen, who is going to pick up on this theme.